Good evening from your news team here at CNN Money Switzerland. I'm Hannah Wise with the latest news headlines this Tuesday evening. 119 new cases of coronavirus have been confirmed in the last 24 hours here in Switzerland. This is the lowest number of new cases in 6 weeks. The total number of infections is now at just over 28,000. Well, the first moves to open a limited number of shops in Switzerland will start on April the 27th, with Canton Aargau asking the Federal Council to open all shops by this date. A new update from the Swiss government is expected on Wednesday. Meanwhile, Italy's government will outline a plan later this week in the first steps to reopen the country. Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte suggested that the plan will be implemented from May the 4th. On Monday, Italy recorded the first fall in active cases, a small but positive move as described by authorities there. The COVID-19 pandemic could nearly double the number of people suffering from acute hunger. That's according to the World Food Programme today. The United Nations group says the crisis is pushing figures to 265 million by the end of 2020. That's up 130 million since 2019. Germany's Oktoberfest has been cancelled this year because of the coronavirus. Organisers say the risk of infection would be too high and that it would be impossible to keep your distance and to work with masks. The cancellation is an economic blow to the city of Munich, which can attract around 6 million visitors for the iconic event. Swiss watch exports fell sharply in March, decreasing by 21.5 billion francs to 1.4 billion francs compared to the previous year. The Swiss Watch Federation says most markets declined significantly. Italy, for example, was down more than 57%, but a few did see an increase. US and China both posting double-digit growth. Further deterioration, however, is expected in April. Jungfrau Bahn Holdings has announced that no dividend payment will be made for the year 2019 amid the global spread of the coronavirus pandemic. It said it assumed that the results for the Swiss tourist attraction in 2020 would fall significantly below those of previous years. Swiss startup Teralytics normally provides insights about people's mobility to transportation planners and mobility providers. However, since the outbreak, they've evolved from facilitating journeys around the world to helping the world stay at home. And CEO Alistair McLeod says business is booming.
There's a great demand for recent information, like what happened today, what happened yesterday, in order that, no matter what you're trying to do, manage your system, manage your city, plan for the future, and people really want to understand this on a super frequent basis. So you're right. We're now focusing on what are people not doing, but there's insight in what people are not doing as well, right? Especially as it's not binary. They don't either move or not move. There's always a trend, and monitoring trends to understand what's been happening, how are we reversing into the problem, and how are we growing our way back out. Super important. And we're getting a lot of positive feedback from clients that are demanding this sort of regular daily data, but also we're feeding in this sort of pro bono data to researchers and epidemiologists who again need the daily data to build their models.
US oil prices have continued to trade in negative territory after sinking below zero for the first time ever yesterday. Well, joining me now from commodity trading house Trafigura, I'm delighted to welcome Chief Economist Said Rahim. Thank you for speaking to us on this. First of all, how shocking was yesterday's dip below zero for you?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. It was absolutely shocking, I think, not just for me, but for the market as a whole. This is unprecedented, really, in commodity markets. We have seen negative pricing for some niche commodities at times in the past, but never for the world's largest and most traded commodity. And it's simply telling you what is being reflected in the financial markets is finally reflecting what's happening on the physical side.
So what actually happens? Do you continue to trade at negative prices? How does this impact traders at Trafigura?
Well, actually, if you look at it, it was very small volumes that actually went through on the negative side. But what this does is it allows the economics of the physical market to then remove oil from where there's too much of it, which is at the Cushing storage hub. So in a sense, this is the market solving the problem through price by then incentivizing and you to be able to move oil by train, truck, barge, whatever means you have to be able to move oil away from where there's too much of it.
I mean, you've been trying to kind of stay on top of this whole supply and demand issue, and it's been coming for some time, as you indicated. I mean, how have you been doing it up until now?
I mean, I think generally we have been trying to find as much storage as we possibly can. When we first started to see the signs of the strain in the physical market, we and our peers, I'm sure, were all going out and trying to find all the storage that we could, specifically on land initially, because that's where it's cheaper. But what you're seeing now is actually oil, both crude oil and refined products, moving on to floating storage, so storing it on ships, which, as you can imagine, is more expensive, but it's telling you that that's where the market is today, that actually makes sense economically to do. And
So
so
it's actually
market,
helpful. It's actually helpful for you then that the prices have dropped below zero. It means you can do something.
That's exactly it. It's not even the price dropping below zero as much as what the price of the commodity is today versus what it will be in the future. And when that difference is large enough, then it allows you to actually do things like put oil onto ships and float it for some period of time. And that's the market's way of saying this is how we resolve this massive inefficiency and this disconnect that we've never seen before.
Well, you can resolve it in the short term by putting it on ships, but what about longer term? I mean, OPEC countries, OPEC plus countries, could even ask G20 nations to kind of buy up the excess oil or reduce supply further. I mean, what's going to happen and how quickly can we see impact?
I mean, ultimately, the only solver of this is going to be demand and a return of economic activity, because that has stopped at a scale we've never seen before. And so there's no amount of supply cuts that will allow you to rebalance the market. This has to be a return of demand, has to be a return of economic activity. And while we're seeing some positive signs of that in places like Europe, this is not a broad-based wave yet. And so until people are driving to work, to school, to wherever else, getting back on planes, this is still a major, major overhang. So even with the supply cuts, you still have an enormous amount of oil that is going into tank today. So even as economic activity returns, you're still going to have to work off that excess inventory over some period of time.
Well, this can only be bad news then for certain smaller US oil producers. How many of them do you see going out of business in this situation?
It's a hard call because there are so many of them. I'd say there's at least 1,000, if not more, smaller size producers. And so I think what we will see is this will be the free market in its sharpest expression, right? We're saying, okay, who are the people who are either disadvantaged in terms of cost structure, acreage, physical location in terms of access to pipelines and storage. And basically, if you're in those areas, then you're going to have a difficult time riding through a long period of low prices. So I think this is an industry that has been ripe for consolidation for some time, and we may see that now really start to pick up as some of the bigger producers with stronger balance sheets, better access to infrastructure and export markets are able to then make a better go of it.
And what about the likes of you and I? When will we start to feel the benefits of these low oil prices? I'm assuming we won't be paid to fill our tanks, but we will start paying less.
Well, it will depend very much by location. Being here in Europe, it does take a lot longer to feed through, partly because of the tax structures and everything else, whereas places in America are already seeing the benefit. So you can buy gasoline for under $1 a gallon in parts of the United States. People are showing, posting pictures of them filling up their entire tank for under $10 in some places. So it's already there. It's already starting to feed through in the US because it's a much faster response mechanism. Other places will take longer, but ultimately this will be a massive tax cut basically for the global consumer, and is one of the things that should help us on the recovery when we start to come out of this.
Saad Rahim, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Scientists at CERN, which is the world's biggest particle physics laboratory based here in Switzerland, are developing a simpler, cheaper ventilator model to help treat patients with COVID-19. Casimira Jefford has the story.
This is CERN, the biggest particle physics laboratory in the world, located here in Geneva. Its scientists and engineers are best known for their research into the beginnings of the universe. But since the outbreak, they've been using their expertise to invent a new ventilator for coronavirus patients, inspired by equipment used every day in its labs.
So you're a physicist at CERN, and correct me if I'm wrong, but your day job before coronavirus broke out wasn't working necessarily on ventilators. This is a completely different project for you. Tell us how it came about.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, up to now, I've been working as part of a team on the LHCb experiment. So it's one of the 4 major experiments at the CERN collider. And when the pandemic broke out, obviously in our team, we were discussing and brainstorming if there was any way that we could contribute. And we looked at many avenues. But in fact, one of the things that we've been doing for many years is running detailed gas regulation systems as part of our experiments and as part of our research and development. And when we looked at the concept of a ventilator and we looked at what we had running in our lab already, we realized that there was this amazing match between the requirements. And we became very excited about this. And at the same time, the UK government released a set of specifications, a set of guidelines of what a rapidly manufactured ventilator system could look like.
Ventilators at the moment are, as we know, in short supply, but there are a lot of different companies working on ventilator models. But what makes the prototype that you're working on different from the other ones out there?
Yes, well, and as you said, there's a need for ventilators, and there's a need for a very large number of ventilators. And so our design is based on components which are cheap, they're easy to obtain, and it's not in competition with the manufacturers who are trying to ramp up their standard production. We also have a system which is based on, let's say, a safety first concept. So in order to deliver the pressure to the patient so they can take their breaths, we have a buffer in our system. So that's like a container, which is 10 liters, which fills with air, and then the air is then supplied to the patient. And this is a very safe way of delivering the pressure in a gentle and controlled fashion. And it also addresses the needs which have been requested by the regulatory agencies.
And so, and one of the other qualities that I read is that this kind of ventilator that you're developing would be used by patients who are recovering and therefore free up other types of ventilators for people who are in.
Absolutely, there's a big range of ventilators which are available commercially, and that's another aim of what we do. Our ventilator won't have the most high-end specifications. It won't have the most fancy modes of operation, but our ventilator could support a patient through the long recovery phase, which is, in the case of COVID, is very long. And so during this time, if our ventilator is used, this means that if there's a top-end machine which is in high demand in the hospital, that's freed up for the intensive care patients which need it the most.
What stage are you at now in the development?
So yeah, we've just lived through a very intense period because this development could only start once we had access to our laboratory at CERN. And of course, in the context of a lockdown, this was quite complicated. We started this development on the 27th of March. So you can count how many days that we've been in. I want to express my profound admiration for the team, which within one day, after having discussed it a little bit, within one day there was something which was able itself to breathe. Within a week, we had a prototype which was able to connect to, let's say, mechanical lungs. They're a bit like these kind of silicone bags, and you can see them breathing, going up and down. And what we're doing now is we're testing the prototype on a quite fancy simulator. And there are many of these available. The one that we use is called Test Chest. It's able to simulate the progress of disease, say, in a COVID patient. And so what would be the resistance and the compliance of the lungs at various stages during the disease. And so we can check that the ventilator does the correct thing. And all of this is being done under the supervision of clinicians. Another thing that we really benefited from in the lockdown was that with everybody moving to Zoom and to, let's say, electronic means of communication, we were able to really reach out internationally. So we have a big clinical team which are advising us. There are people which are based in Australia, which are based on both coasts in the US. There are people from Europe. And of course, what's extremely important for us is the contact from the local hospitals, and that's both in Geneva and in Lausanne. And having that support enabled us to really speed up the design and include what the doctors want. Our team is really focused now on getting to the point of a fully functional prototype, which is very helpful for people to be able to see what are the attributes, how it could be adapted locally for their use. And I think that this is a goal that we're really aiming for in, let's say, a week from now. So that will make a total of between 3 and 4 weeks development. And then after that, I think we'll be able to make stronger statements about how the deployment could look.
Now, if you're an art lover and can't wait to get back out there to the galleries and events, well, you better have much of September to December clear. Fair postponements in the first part of this year now mean that things like Expo Chicago, Frieze in London, TIFAF in New York, and Art Basel Miami are now all happening in the last few months of this year. Tanya Koenig asked Swiss art dealer Dominique Levy, who has galleries around the world, if attending all these fairs was even realistic. Take a listen.
If we take this bigger than just our little art world, I do not believe anyone will want to come to an art fair as long as we don't have a vaccine for this terrible situation. Even if you have an antidote. Los Angeles has already banished any big gathering until 2021. Who will want in September, if, by the way, kids are finally going back to school and you will need the time to resettle families, and do you really want to jump in a plane for an art fair where it's all recycled air, where you're rubbing elbow, where social distance is impossible? I think it's time for the art world to be realistic. And I know it's hard to hear because it's the main source of, or one of the important source of our revenue. But I think right now, the health and our social responsibility and our social duties, it's much more important. I don't see any art fair before next year.
If I go on the program on Art Basel in September, you're still on the list, Levi Gorvi. So I wonder, are you considering not going?
I've never missed a Basel Art Fair. So if the fair is existing, of course we will participate. But I cannot imagine the fair finding the place and the I don't even think they'll be allowed to, put it that way. I can't imagine. And this is valid for Maastricht and Basel and Miami. Now, to answer the other side of your question, is it possible to have, I think it's seven art fair in between September and December? Absolutely not. This is one of the things that has to stop. And as a gallerist, I will not do 5 or 6 fairs in a few months. If it is safe and if it is responsible, I will consider doing 2 or 3 at the great maximum.
Also, Art Basel Hong Kong in March was cancelled, and then it turned into an online viewing room, and you participated in that. Can you even compare it to a real fair?
No. I think Art Basel Hong Kong online was a very interesting experiment, because I think what it showed us, it's that it doesn't work. Not because the technology had an issue, not because the beginning was just an explosion. I think everyone rushed to see what it was, but mostly the art community, not so much collectors. And it's not friendly. You go on a website, you are forced to really look at art on a digital way. It is slow. You're not having a conversation. You're not having fun. You're not seeing your friends. You're not looking at one piece of art and then looking at another and a third one, having that experience. So most people went in, stayed half an hour, 20 minutes, 15 minutes. And I think the only sales that were made were when you had made the outreach before. Hey, I'm going to launch Art Hong Kong. I have that piece in my booth, which I think you might be interested in. But therefore, you don't need the online art fair. So to me personally, I don't believe that an online Art Basel has a future. It's the exact 180 opposite of what a fair is about. So it can't work like that. It has to be something that is more dynamic and more exciting than just going so slowly through booth after booth after booth. It doesn't work. You might as well call the gallery that you know and say, what do you have by that artist?
And Art Basel as parents company had quite a blow in the last few weeks. Their other fair, Basel World, had a lot major brands pulling out, Rolex, LVMH, etc. And of course, the share price dropped. And now with the art fairs being canceled or postponed, even worse. Now there are voices of shareholders saying that MCH Group should be taken apart and sold. So I was wondering if the selling of the Art Basel division is something that is being talked about in the art world.
That's a very tough question. I think, of course, it's being talked about. I think Art Basel is the fundamental art fair for art dealers and galleries all around the world. So we are all very aware and painfully aware of what's happening with the mother company. And I think, and I hope that it's all of our duties and responsibility to try to keep an Art Basel at all cost, whether it will mean reinventing it, recreating, or whether it will mean putting energy into saving the existing one. I don't know. But yes, the conversation is full on, especially in the last 10 days when the shares have dropped so tremendously.
Now, if social distancing proves difficult even for adults, imagine asking a young child to do so. Well, it's not an easy feat, especially when everyone is playing outdoors in the beautiful weather we've had so far this spring here in Switzerland. And with many schools still closed across the globe, including here in Switzerland, many parents are asking themselves how they can make this work without losing their sanity. Ana Maria Montero looks at the big picture.
On days like these, it's really tempting to let your children play outside. However, remember that according to the Swiss federal government, those 2-meter social distancing rules still apply, and that includes the children.
So unless they're playing with their direct family, they would have to play like this all the time, a scenario experts agree is highly unlikely.
It depends what age the children are. If you expect children from, let's say, under 7 to make social distancing while they're on the playground, this is really difficult and not realistic to ask from them.
Some parents agree and have devised plans with their neighbors in which their young children can only play with each other, but not with anyone outside of the community. Other parents, meanwhile, opt for more isolation.
You have to look individually at the situation, what the family is right at that moment and what possibilities they have, and then you have to try to help them through there.
I decided not to go on the playground anymore and have the children just close to me and stick with one another together. And they basically do not play with friends anymore.
We stay at home entertaining them, and we try to vary the activities and the toys, just organizing them around the house so that the kids won't get bored. Today we played dress up, for example, and we're just trying to be as patient as we can.
Very important is that you explain the kids what's going on. They have to understand why the social distancing is happening, and when they understand in their words why they have to do it, it's easier to follow the rules.
Especially for the younger ones, videos like these can help do the trick.
Niest oder die Hand gibt, kann Corona auf eine gesunde Person überspringen.
And nothing like bored kids to spark creativity, even for parents.
Oh, beep, 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 beep. You're on fire!
Turns out there's tons of stuff on YouTube, different kids channels where they teach you, like, I don't know, Play-Doh modeling, crafting, and I kind of rediscovered I used to love that as a kid, so I started doing that with her.
To help my friends with kids is I organize online bingo afternoons. So I have I borrowed a bingo set from my upstairs neighbor, and it's nice because I give my friends like 1 hour free time, and I entertain my own kids, and they love to engage online with other kids. So there's a lot of win-win in there.
And if screens are also supporting you with the childcare, experts recommend not to sweat it.
Just fight about the really important things, and if children are watching TV or playing games or are too long on the mobiles at this time, I wouldn't be so worried about that. Don't put yourself under pressure. Keep the expectations low. Try to be as peaceful as you can.
That's you up to date this Tuesday. Thanks for joining us. Remember, everything is available on our website, cnnmoney.ch, but we just wanted to leave you with these pictures. This is the Lyrid meteor shower that's been taking place since Sunday night, and it will last until Wednesday. The meteors are pieces of the comet Thatcher, which are flying around our planet's upper atmosphere, and they can go as fast as 110,000 miles an hour. Experts believe around 10 meteors per hour will be visible this time round. And in fact, this shower is one of the few astronomical events that can be seen around the globe. Enjoy it if you see it. Bye-bye from me.